It was raining that night in Seattle, the kind of rain that feels personal, like the sky itself understands heartbreak. Grace Bennett, tired and unseen, walked into the glass tower of Cole and Dalton Architects with a letter in her hand and tears in her eyes. She wasn't there to fight. She was there to quit. But what if the door that closed behind her wasn't meant to trap her, but to save her? What if the man waiting on the top floor, the CEO everyone feared, wasn't just about power and profit, but about seeing the people everyone else overlooked in one conversation, one locked door, and one impossible offer? Grace's life would change forever. But not because someone saved her, because someone finally reminded her she was worth saving. Why do we give up just before everything starts to change? And how many of us are standing one step away from the moment that could rewrite everything we believe about ourselves? If you've ever felt invisible, this story is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because what happens next will stay with you long after the rain stops. The rain fell hard that evening, drumming against the glass towers of downtown Seattle like a relentless rhythm no one could escape. Outside, headlights blurred into rivers of gold and white. Inside the office of Cole and Dalton Architects, the hum of fluorescent lights was the only sound left after hours. It was nearly 9:30 p.m. when Grace Bennett finally leaned back in her chair, her shoulders stiff, her eyes dry and burning from the screen's glow. The city outside shimmered, alive and indifferent. She stared at the unfinished blueprint glowing on her monitor, a design for a public library project that wasn't even hers anymore. Not officially, at least. Mark Dalton's name would be on the presentation tomorrow morning. Again? Grace had stopped counting how many times her ideas had worn someone else's signature. It had been happening for years. She'd watched Mark, her supervisor, take the credit with that easy smile and those practiced words. It was a team effort, but everyone in the room knew whose effort it really was. Grace had been with the firm for 6 years. 6 years of late nights, skipped weekends, and silent sacrifices. 6 years of proving her worth to people who pretended not to see it. At first, she thought it was the price of ambition. That if she just kept her head down long enough, worked hard enough, stayed patient enough, someone would notice. But no one ever did. The office was empty now, the rows of cubicles stretching like forgotten dreams. Grace's reflection shimmered faintly on her computer screen, tired eyes, loose strands of hair falling from a bun, the faint lines that had deepened around her mouth over the past few years. She wasn't old, not yet, but she felt worn thin, as if each unacknowledged project had taken something from her. Sometimes she wondered when exactly she had started disappearing. When had she stopped correcting people who assumed Mark was the mind behind her work? When had she stopped raising her hand in meetings? When had she started believing it didn't matter anymore? Grace pressed a palm to her forehead and exhaled. The sound of the rain against the glass grew louder, almost mocking. It was strange how storms could make the whole world feel smaller, and yet, somehow, more honest. She turned to the document open beside her resignation letter. Grace Bennett. She had written it 3 nights ago, saved it, and opened it every morning since tonight. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat waiting to stop. To whom it may concern, please accept this letter as my formal resignation from Cole and Dalton Architects, effective immediately. I am deeply grateful for the experience, but I can no longer contribute in an environment where integrity and recognition are negotiable. Grace read the words again. Her own voice felt foreign, even on the page. She wasn't a quitter. She'd built her career from the ground up, fought for every inch she stood on. But there was a difference between perseverance and self-erasure. And somewhere along the way, she had crossed that line. Her printer came to life with a low mechanical hum, the only pulse in the quiet room. The paper slid out slowly, warm and final. Grace reached for it, her fingers trembling just slightly. She folded the letter carefully, creasing it with precision. Engineers like her always paid attention to edges and symmetry. Funny how even heartbreak could be measured in straight lines. She stood and looked around the office one last time, the empty desks, the wilting plant near the window, the stack of unfinished models collecting dust on the shelf. She remembered when this place had felt like promise. Back then, she believed hard work was its own kind of magic. Now, it just felt like noise. Her gaze fell on the framed rendering of the Piermont Library project, her first major design, the one that had earned the firm an award 2 years ago, the one Mark had accepted on stage while she clapped from the audience. That night, she had told herself it didn't matter who got the credit as long as the work spoke for itself. But the truth was, the work didn't speak. People did. And people had chosen not to say her name. Grace slipped the envelope into her bag, turned off the monitor, and listened as the darkness folded in around her. Maybe this was what freedom sounded like: the hum of a printer cooling down, the rain against the window, the faint click of her heels on the polished floor. As she stepped toward the elevator, the automatic lights flickered off behind her, one by one, until only the hallway ahead remained illuminated. The world seemed to narrow into that single strip of light, leading her somewhere she wasn't sure she was ready to go. She hesitated by the glass doors overlooking Fifth Avenue. The streetlights below shimmered through the rain, distorted, unreal. Seattle always looked softer through the storm, like a city half asleep, forgiving in its melancholy. Grace's reflection looked back at her. There was something quietly defiant in the way she stood, holding her resignation letter. It wasn't anger that filled her, it was exhaustion, the kind that settles deep in your bones after years of trying to prove you belong. She pressed the elevator button. The doors slid open with a sigh. Sometimes, she whispered to no one, giving up feels like the only way to survive. The words hung in the air, fragile, honest, true. The elevator descended, each floor passing with a soft mechanical hum. As the numbers blinked, 23, 22, 21, she felt something inside her loosen, like a thread finally breaking free. Outside, thunder rolled over the city, echoing against the glass. Grace tightened her grip on the envelope. Tomorrow. She would hand it in. Tomorrow. She would walk away. She didn't know that tonight, before the storm ended, someone would stop her. Someone who had been watching all along. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Grace Bennett turned it over in her hands as if its weight might change her mind, but it didn't. The words inside were final, like the last page of a book she never wanted to finish. The office elevator glowed softly at the end of the corridor, its metallic doors reflecting the pale light of the hallway. She paused, looking back one last time at the space that had been her world for 6 long years. Her desk lamp still burned faintly, a halo of yellow against the gray. Her coffee cup, lipstick stained and forgotten. The sketches pinned to the cubicle wall, each one a whisper of ideas that never bore her name. She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. It was strange how endings didn't feel like explosions. They faded quietly, like sighs in the dark. Grace pressed the elevator button. A soft chime echoed through the empty corridor. As the doors opened, she stepped inside and faced her reflection in the mirrored walls. The woman staring back looked older than 38. Not by years, but by wear. The subtle lines beneath her eyes told stories of sleepless nights. Her blazer hung slightly loose on her shoulders. Her hair, once golden and lively, was now tied back too tight, as though she were holding herself together by that single knot. She whispered to her reflection, barely audible, "You've given them everything, Grace, every design, every idea, every part of yourself. And what did they give you back?" The elevator began to rise. Numbers blinking softly. 16. 17. Each floor hummed past like a heartbeat she could finally feel again. For years, she had watched these same numbers from the other direction descending at the end of another long day, telling herself tomorrow would be different. It never was. But tonight, she wasn't going down. She was going up. The thought startled her. The decision had come without planning, impulsive, maybe reckless. She could have left the letter with HR. She could have slipped it into a manager's inbox and disappeared quietly by morning. But something inside her rebelled against invisibility. If she was leaving, someone at the top should know why. The elevator slowed, the gentle hum turning into silence. A digital voice announced, 25th floor. Grace's stomach fluttered as the doors slid open. The air changed immediately. Cooler, still, fragrant with something faint and expensive, maybe cedarwood or citrus. The carpet was plush beneath her heels, soft enough to silence her steps. Abstract paintings adorned the cream-colored walls. Everything here was deliberate. The lighting, the temperature, even the way sound seemed to dissolve in the air. This wasn't just another floor. It was another world. She stepped out hesitantly, clutching the envelope. The space opened into a wide hallway lined with frosted glass offices. Each door bore a sleek silver nameplate, Ethan Cole, Chief Executive Officer. She'd seen his name 1,000 times in company emails, etched onto project awards, printed on glossy annual reports. But never like this, not in three-dimensional silver. Not just a title on paper, but a presence. Grace swallowed. Her throat was dry. She took a few steps closer, her heels sinking softly into the carpet. Through the glass wall, she could see a faint light still glowing inside the corner office. Someone was still working. She hesitated, her mind racing. What was she doing? She wasn't one of those people who made scenes. She wasn't confrontational, but she wasn't invisible either. Not anymore. Mark Dalton had humiliated her one last time that morning. He had called her kiddo in front of the entire design team, dismissing her proposal with a smirk. Then he'd used her idea, presented it as his own in the afternoon briefing, and collected the praise without blinking. That was the moment something in her had broken. No, not broken, awakened. Now, here she was, standing outside the CEO's office with her resignation letter in hand. The logical part of her mind screamed, "Leave it on his desk and go." But another voice, quieter, deeper, said, "No. He should hear it from you. He should know what kind of rot his company hides beneath its glass and gold." Grace's hand hovered over the doorknob. Her pulse quickened. She could almost hear her mother's voice, calm, practical, always cautious. "Don't make trouble, Gracie. Just do your job. Stay polite and good things will come." Good things hadn't come. Not for 6 years. She gripped the envelope tighter and knocked softly. No answer. She almost turned away. But then, through the crack in the frosted glass, she saw movement, a shadow shifting behind the desk. Another knock. Louder this time. A voice came from inside, deep and steady. "Come in." Grace's fingers brushed the cold metal handle. For a moment, she hesitated again, caught between fear and something that felt like courage. The door opened with a whisper. Warm lights spilled out from the office, and the rain beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows shimmered like liquid silver. The city below was a painting of lights, alive and infinite. And behind the massive oak desk sat Ethan Cole. He looked up, slightly startled, as if he hadn't expected anyone at this hour. His tie was loosened, sleeves rolled up, the remnants of a long day visible in the tired lines around his eyes. Yet there was something grounded about him, a kind of quiet control. Grace froze in the doorway, words catching in her throat. The envelope felt impossibly heavy again. I'm sorry to interrupt. Mr. Cole? She began, her voice trembling slightly. I needed to give you this personally. He gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. "Come in." But she didn't move. Not yet. There was a storm raging inside her, one made of anger, exhaustion, and the faintest spark of relief. Relief that, at last, she was saying goodbye. She stepped forward, slowly, like someone walking into a confession. Outside, the rain pressed harder against the glass, filling the silence between them. Grace set the envelope on his desk, the sound barely audible but final. "It's my resignation letter," she said softly. Ethan Cole leaned back, studying her with unreadable eyes. He didn't reach for the envelope. He didn't even glance down. The air in the room shifted, charged, expectant. For a heartbeat, Grace thought she saw something flicker across his face. Not surprise, not irritation, but curiosity. And though she didn't know it yet, this moment, this single, trembling decision to hand him that envelope herself would change everything. The kind of change that doesn't happen in lightning bolts, but in quiet storms, under rain that refuses to stop falling. The soft click of the door closing behind her sounded louder than it should have. Grace Bennett stood just inside the office, the smell of cedar wood and rain filling the air. The city stretched out beneath the windows, lights shimmering like 1,000 small fires in the night. Ethan Cole looked up from a stack of papers, his pen still poised above a page. He blinked once, adjusting his focus, and then offered a calm nod. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice even, low. "You're here late." Grace swallowed hard, clutching the envelope in both hands. "I won't take much of your time." "Mr. Cole." Her tone was polite, steady on the surface, but her heart pounded against her ribs. Ethan gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. "Please sit." Grace shook her head. "I'd rather stand." He leaned back, studying her. Something about his expression wasn't impatient or condescending. It was curious, like a man who'd been handed a puzzle and wanted to understand it. "What brings you up here at this hour?" he asked. She took a breath, held it, then stepped forward. "This," she said quietly, placing the envelope on the desk between them. Ethan's eyes moved to it. He didn't reach for it right away. Instead, he rested his hand lightly on the envelope's edge, as if feeling the weight of it before deciding what to do. Grace's throat tightened. "It's my resignation letter." The words seemed to hang in the air longer than they should have. Ethan finally picked up the envelope, turning it over once. He didn't open it. His thumb brushed the sealed edge. thoughtful. Then, without a word, he rose from his chair, walked to the office door, and locked it. Grace's breath caught. Her pulse spiked instantly. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice rising just slightly. You can't just lock the door." Ethan turned back toward her, calm, unhurried. "Relax. I'm not keeping you prisoner." He returned to his desk, his tone firm but not unkind. "I'm keeping you from making a mistake." Grace stared at him, stunned. "Excuse me, sit down. Ms. Bennett." His voice softened. "Please." After a long, tense moment, she did. Not because she wanted to, but because her knees suddenly felt unsteady. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the steady patter of rain against the glass. Ethan folded his hands on the desk. "You've been with the firm 6 years. You're one of our strongest designers. Why are you walking away?" Grace hesitated, eyes fixed on the dark window beyond him. Her reflection shimmered there, small, tired, almost transparent. "I don't think you'd understand," she murmured. "Try me." Something in his voice, quiet authority wrapped in patience, made her chest tighten. For years, she'd been silenced by people who spoke over her, corrected her, ignored her. Now, for the first time, someone was offering silence that asked her to speak. Grace's fingers twisted in her lap. "I'm leaving because I'm invisible here," she said finally. Her voice was low but steady. "Because my ideas are stolen, my name erased from work I built, because my supervisor thinks he can take credit and I'll stay quiet forever." Ethan didn't interrupt. He just listened, leaning slightly forward. She continued, the words spilling faster now, too long trapped. "I used to believe hard work was enough, that if I stayed late, hit every deadline, someone would notice. But all that's happened is I've disappeared, bit by bit." Her throat tightened, but she kept going. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to watch someone else receive applause for something that came from your mind? Your heart?" Ethan's expression changed just slightly, but enough. A flicker of recognition. Grace laughed softly, bitterly. "Of course you don't. You're the man on top. You get credit for everything." He didn't flinch. "That's not entirely true," he said quietly. She shook her head. "You wouldn't know what it's like to stay quiet in meetings because speaking up means being labeled difficult, or to smile while someone like Mark Dalton calls you kiddo in front of clients, to work through weekends so your boss can go golfing and then watch him present your project as his own." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. She pressed her hands together to steady them. "I'm tired," she whispered. "Tired of trying to earn what should have been mine already. Tired of being the ghost in my own story." The room went silent again, heavy and intimate. Ethan stood by the window now, arms crossed, eyes lowered as if absorbing each word. The storm outside cast streaks of silver light across his face. After a long moment, he said quietly, "You're right. You deserve better." Grace blinked, startled. What he turned to face her fully. "You're right. You should have been recognized. You should never have had to choose between integrity and survival." She stared at him, unsure whether to feel validated or angry. "Then why didn't you do anything? You're the CEO. This is your company." Ethan exhaled slowly, almost wearily. "Because people don't always tell me what's really happening below. They assume I don't want to know." And maybe he paused, searching for words. Maybe I didn't try hard enough to see. Grace looked at him for a long time, the anger in her chest twisting into something sadder. Ethan walked back to his desk and, at last, picked up the envelope again. "I haven't opened it yet," he said. "Because I wanted to ask one question first." She met his gaze. What question? He leaned forward slightly. "If you weren't invisible, if your work was truly seen and valued, would you still want to leave?" Grace didn't answer immediately. The rain filled the silence. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't even remember what it feels like to be seen." Ethan nodded slowly, as though he'd expected that answer. "Then maybe," he said, tearing the envelope neatly in half, "we start there." Grace gasped. What are you?" "I'm not accepting your resignation," Ethan said simply. "Not yet?" Her pulse thundered in her ears. "You can't, just I can," he said evenly, a trace of quiet conviction in his tone. "And I will? Because you're making a decision from exhaustion, not truth. I'd rather you leave knowing your worth than stay convinced you have none." Grace sat frozen, unsure whether to feel furious or grateful. Ethan leaned back, studying her again. "You're not invisible, Miss Bennett. I've been watching your work for months. Every project that crossed my desk, I recognized your touch, the precision, the empathy, the way you design for people, not prestige." Grace's throat tightened again. "But for a different reason?" "You've been watching my work?" "Yes," he said simply. "Because it reminds me of how I started." Something in his expression softened, like a curtain drawn back. Grace looked down at the torn envelope on the desk, her escape route, now in pieces. She felt a strange mix of fear and something else she hadn't felt in years, hope. Ethan's voice broke through the quiet. "You've been surviving here, Grace. But surviving isn't living. Stay. Just long enough to see what happens when you stop shrinking." The storm outside began to fade into mist, and for the first time in 6 years, Grace didn't know whether she was terrified or beginning to wake up. The sound of paper tearing still lingered in the air, a sharp, deliberate sound that seemed to slice through everything Grace Bennett thought she knew. Her resignation letter lay in 2 perfect halves on Ethan Cole's desk, their edges fluttering slightly under the draft of the air vent. Grace sat frozen, pulse pounding, unsure whether to be angry or relieved. "You had no right to do that," she finally said, her voice low, trembling. "That letter was mine." Ethan didn't flinch. "You're right, it was—" He leaned forward, his tone steady but unyielding. "But so is your future, and I'm not going to let you throw it away without understanding the full picture." Grace's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" Ethan reached into a drawer and pulled out a thin folder, sliding it across the desk toward her. "This," he said, "is your file. Every project you've worked on in the past 3 years, every design concept, every report." Grace hesitated before touching it. Her name was printed neatly on the tab, Bennett. Grace L. "I read every major proposal that crosses my desk," Ethan said quietly. "And every time your supervisor, Mark Dalton, sent something forward, I could see the difference." He paused, meeting her eyes. "The precision, the empathy, the balance of form and function, that's your work. I know it." Grace blinked, stunned. "You read my projects?" "I did. And I recognized your voice, even when someone else signed the cover sheet." He tapped the folder once, as if to punctuate the truth. "Don't look so surprised, Grace. I didn't build this company by being blind." Her breath caught in her throat. The anger she'd held for so long flickered into something else: disbelief. Maybe? Then why didn't you stop him? She asked quietly. If you knew Mark was taking credit for my work, why didn't you do anything? Ethan exhaled slowly, leaning back. Because I wanted to see how long you'd let him. The answer landed like a stone. Grace stared at him, eyes widening. You were testing me, no. He shook his head firmly. I was waiting for you. There's a difference. Her jaw tightened. That's easy for you to say from up there, watching from your corner office while the rest of us are down here trying to survive. I know what survival looks like, Ethan said softly. I spent the first 5 years of my career designing parking lots under someone else's name. I know the feeling of working twice as hard to earn half the credit. I know the taste of silence. The confession startled her. She looked up, really seeing him for the first time. There were faint lines around his eyes. Not just from age, but from the kind of fatigue that comes from carrying too much responsibility. He continued, When I started this firm, I promised myself I'd never let it become another machine that grinds good people down. But lately, I've realized that promise only matters if I act on it. Grace glanced at the torn letter. So what now? You expect me to just pretend everything's fine? Go back to working under Mark like none of this happened? Ethan's mouth curved into a faint, humorless smile. No. I expect you to work directly with me. She blinked. What I want you to step out of that cubicle farm and into this office, he said, as a creative advisor, reporting only to me. Your insight on community design is something this company desperately needs, and something Dalton will never understand. Grace's pulse raced. You can't be serious. That would be unorthodox, he interrupted gently. Maybe, but so was tearing up your resignation. Her mind spun. Do you have any idea what people will say? That I used you to get here, that I'm sleeping my way up the chain? Ethan didn't hesitate. Let them talk. His tone hardened just slightly, carrying weight that filled the room. I'd rather defend fairness than watch silence win again. Grace stared at him, trying to process his calm certainty. For years, she'd had to measure every word, every look, every gesture, always careful, always small. And here he was, offering her a path that felt both terrifying and liberating. I don't want special treatment, she said finally. I just want credit for my work. Ethan nodded. Then that's exactly what you'll get. But what about Mark? I'll handle him. Ethan said simply. The board will too. Once I show them the discrepancies in his submissions. But for now, I want you to focus on what's next. Grace's hands trembled slightly in her lap. I don't even know if I can do this, she admitted. Working up here, under you, it's a different world. Ethan leaned forward, voice low and even. You don't need to know. You just need to try. Something inside her cracked open, not in pain, but in relief. For so long, the only choices she'd known were endurance or escape. Now there was something else possibility. She looked down at the shredded paper, the ruined resignation letter. It looked almost symbolic now, a boundary line between the life she had and the life she might finally claim. Ethan's tone softened. Grace, I see you. I've seen you for a long time, but this isn't about what I see. It's about what you're willing to believe about yourself. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. You really think I can do this? Ethan smiled, not with arrogance, but with quiet conviction. I don't think. I know. Grace felt the burn of tears behind her eyes, but she blinked them away. She wouldn't cry. Not again. Not here. For the first time in years, someone wasn't asking her to stay quiet. Someone was asking her to stand tall. She rose slowly, her reflection merging with the skyline behind him, two figures framed against a city of glass and rain. "All right," she said finally. "One trial, one chance." Ethan nodded once, satisfied. "That's all I ask." He extended his hand across the desk. Grace hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm, grounding. Outside, lightning flashed over the sound, illuminating the city in a single, fleeting burst of white. "Welcome to the 25th floor, Ms. Bennett," Ethan said quietly. "Let's build something that matters." And for the first time in a very long while, Grace felt the faint hum of hope returning a heartbeat. She'd thought she'd lost somewhere along the way. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a different world. Grace Bennett stepped out, clutching her coffee like a lifeline, the scent of roasted beans mixed with the faint aroma of polished wood and fresh paper. It was her first official day on the 25th floor, Ethan Cole's floor, the top of Cole and Dalton Architects. It felt too quiet, too calm. Downstairs, there had always been noise phones ringing, printers whirring, the chatter of designers trading sarcastic comments to survive another deadline. Up here, the silence was deliberate, almost sacred. Every detail seemed chosen for elegance: the cream carpet, the glass partitions, the modern art glowing under soft white lights. She felt like she had walked into someone else's life. "Good morning, sweetheart," the voice startled her. From behind the reception desk came a woman in her late 50s with auburn hair swept into a stylish twist. She wore glasses with blue frames and an easy smile that warmed the entire hallway. "You must be Grace," she said, standing and extending a hand. "I'm Martha King. Welcome to the 25th floor." Grace managed a small smile. "Thank you. It's beautiful up here." Martha chuckled. "Beautiful, sure, but don't let the fancy carpet fool you. We work just as hard as everyone else. We just hide it better." Her laughter was rich and genuine, and Grace found herself relaxing a little. Martha handed her a small badge. "Here's your access card. You'll need it to get in and out of the executive wing." She winked. "They like to keep the rest of us from escaping too often." Grace laughed softly. The tension in her chest loosened by a fraction. Martha motioned down the hallway. "Let me show you your office." They passed glass doors with silver nameplates, names Grace had only seen in company memos. Senior executives, department heads, the architects who made the firm's headlines. And then there it was, a smaller corner office, sunlight spilling across the floor. On the door, a new nameplate gleamed: Grace Bennett, Senior Design Advisor. Her breath caught. For a moment, she just stared at it, disbelieving. Her name, her title, visible, permanent, real. Martha opened the door and ushered her in. Not bad, huh? The space was modest compared to Ethan's, but to Grace it felt like a cathedral. A desk of warm oak, a wide window overlooking Puget Sound, a tall plant reaching toward the light. There was even a small corkboard waiting for sketches. A single box sat on the desk, marked "Welcome, HR." Grace placed her coffee beside it, tracing her fingers over her nameplate again. "It doesn't feel real?" she murmured. Martha smiled knowingly. "Give it a week, honey. It'll start to—" Grace turned to her. How long have you been working here? Oh, let's see, Martha said, tapping her chin. 23 years, give or take a few bad haircuts. I've seen this place go through mergers, meltdowns, and more coffee machines than I can count. Grace laughed again, genuine this time. And you're still here. Somebody has to make sure the geniuses don't burn the place down, Martha replied with a wink. Before Grace could respond, a knock sounded on the open door. A tall woman with neatly cropped silver hair stepped in, holding a folder and a tablet. Grace Bennett, she said, extending a hand. I'm Lydia Evans, Director of Human Resources. Her tone was cordial but precise, each word clipped and efficient, like she was used to being obeyed. Grace shook her hand. Nice to meet you. Lydia nodded. Ethan mentioned you'd be joining us. He spoke highly of your work. Grace felt her cheeks warm. That's kind of him. Lydia's gaze softened just a touch. You'll find Mr. Cole doesn't exaggerate often. When he believes in someone, he means it. She handed Grace a sleek tablet. Here's your onboarding packet. Your position comes with new responsibilities and visibility. That means the margin for error gets smaller. Grace straightened, instinctively bracing. Lydia continued. Up here, mistakes echo louder. The higher you climb, the more people are listening for a stumble. The words hit harder than Grace expected. Not unkind, but sharp with truth. I understand, she said quietly. Lydia gave a short nod. Good. I'll let you settle in. Ethan's expecting you at 8:30 for the morning briefing. When she was gone, the room felt suddenly larger, emptier. Grace sank into her chair, the leather cool against her palms. Martha leaned against the doorway, watching her. Don't let Lydia scare you too much. She says that to everyone. Grace smiled faintly. Does it work only on the ones who don't belong up here? Martha said. You'll be fine. Grace wanted to believe that. She really did. After Martha left, she unpacked the HR Box Company notebook, a new stylus, a handbook on leadership protocols. She lined everything neatly on the desk, needing order, control, but even surrounded by proof of her promotion, she couldn't shake the feeling she'd wandered into a room meant for someone else. Her eyes drifted to the window. Seattle's skyline shimmered through a curtain of morning mist. The ferries were already gliding across Elliott Bay, white wakes trailing behind them like threads pulled through fabric. It was beautiful. And yet, all Grace could think was how long before they realized they made a mistake. The old voices crept in Mark Dalton's smug laughter, the colleagues who'd said she wasn't leadership material. She remembered the whispers. She's too quiet, too emotional, too soft. Soft? That word again? As if empathy was weakness, Grace pressed her fingertips to the desk's smooth surface, grounding herself. No, she told herself. She'd earned this. Still, the whisper of doubt wouldn't leave. Her phone buzzed. A calendar reminder, 8:30 a.m. Executive Morning Briefing Conference Room 1. Her first meeting on the 25th floor. With Ethan Cole. With the senior staff. With people who had probably already heard rumors about the fast promotion. She stood, smoothing her blazer, checking her reflection in the glass. You belong here, she said under her breath. You earned this seat. The elevator down the hall chimed again, and footsteps echoed softly toward the conference room. Grace took one last look at her new office, the sunlight, her nameplate, the promise of something different, and then stepped out. The hallway lights flickered gently, reflecting off the glass walls as if the building itself were watching her. In her chest, two feelings warred quietly: fear and resolve. But beneath both, something else had begun to grow. Something like purpose. The glass walls of the 25th floor conference room shimmered with the reflection of morning rain. The long oval table gleamed beneath pendant lights, surrounded by 12 high-backed leather chairs. Grace Bennett sat at the far end, trying not to fidget with the silver pen that Lydia had handed her earlier. Her first executive briefing. She'd barely slept. Every nerve in her body felt stretched thin, humming with anticipation and dread. Ethan Cole sat at the head of the table, posture relaxed but presence undeniable. His navy suit was immaculate, his expression composed. To his right sat the CFO, a compact man with salt-gray hair named Robert Hensley, whose entire demeanor radiated skepticism. To Ethan's left, lounging like he owned the room, sat Mark Dalton. Mark. Grace's stomach tightened. His tie was slightly askew, his grin practiced, self-assured. When his gaze landed on her, it flicked with surprise, then something colder. Well, look who made it upstairs, he said under his breath, smirking. Lydia Evans. Standing near the window with her ever-present tablet, cut him a glance sharp enough to silence him. Ethan cleared his throat. Let's get started. We'll begin with the downtown redevelopment proposal. A massive rendering appeared on the screen, a sleek new complex of apartments and retail space, all glass and chrome. Mark leaned forward, clearly eager. This is our flagship project, slated to break ground in spring. It's bold, modern, and profitable. Projected ROI within 2 years. Grace recognized the design immediately. It was the same project she'd worked on 6 months ago, the one whose entire community park concept Mark had stripped away because green space doesn't sell. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Ethan looked around the table. Thoughts. Robert adjusted his glasses. The numbers look solid, but I want to hear from our new senior design advisor. Grace froze. All eyes turned toward her. She hadn't planned to speak, at least not yet. But she could feel Mark watching, waiting for her to stumble. Ethan met her gaze briefly. A quiet nod of encouragement. Grace took a breath. It's efficient? She began carefully. The structure is visually impressive, and it will probably photograph beautifully. Mark smirked. That's the point. But, Grace continued, and her voice steadied, it feels soulless. The room went still. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. Mark's smile faltered. Excuse me, Grace looked directly at him. We design for profit, not for people. This project ignores the community it's supposed to serve. There's no gathering space, no natural light in half the units, no connection to the environment. It's architecture that isolates, not architecture that inspires. A long, brittle silence followed. Robert blinked. That's quite a statement. Mark chuckled, shaking his head. With all due respect, Grace, this isn't some design school critique. This is business. Investors don't care about benches and flower beds. They care about return on investment. Grace met his gaze steadily. And when those investors leave in 5 years because the building feels cold and tenants don't stay, what then? You'll be chasing short-term numbers while the community resents the company's name on every corner. Her voice trembled at first, but by the end it carried strength, a quiet, unmistakable conviction. Ethan leaned back slightly, eyes never leaving her. Mark scoffed. That's not how the real world works. Actually, Ethan said, cutting in. It's exactly how it works. The room turned to him. Ethan's tone remained calm, but there was a weight behind his words that commanded attention. Grace is right, he continued. We've built a reputation on innovation, but lately we've been designing like accountants, not architects. We've stopped listening to the people who live in the spaces we create. Mark's jaw tightened. Ethan, with all due respect, these are the projects that keep our company profitable, and the ones that keep us forgettable. Ethan replied evenly. Grace's breath caught. He wasn't just defending her, he was agreeing with her. Publicly. Mark turned to her, his tone dripping sarcasm. You've been here, 3 days, and already you're rewriting our business model? Grace inhaled slowly. Maybe someone needs to... The words came out quieter than she expected, but they landed like a stone dropped into still water. Robert cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. All right, let's refocus. Ethan, are you suggesting we pause the redevelopment project? I'm suggesting we reevaluate it, Ethan said. Grace, put together a revision plan that reintroduces human-centered design principles. You'll have full access to the data and client feedback. Grace blinked. You want me to revise it? Ethan nodded. You see what we've missed? I trust your perspective. Mark leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. You can't be serious. I am, Ethan said. And unless you have an objection beyond ego, we'll move forward that way. Mark's mouth opened, then closed again. For once, he had no ready quip. Lydia, standing at the far end of the table, watched quietly. Her expression was unreadable, but when Grace glanced at her, she caught the faintest flicker of approval. The meeting continued, but the atmosphere had changed. The energy in the room was taut now, charged. Grace felt it in the way people shifted in their seats, in the sideways glances they exchanged. When it finally adjourned, the executives filtered out with murmured goodbyes. Mark was the last to rise. He lingered just long enough to lean in close to Grace and whisper, Enjoy your little moment, Bennett. It won't last. Then he left, the scent of his cologne lingering like smoke. Grace exhaled shakily, staring at the empty chair across from her. Her hands trembled, but not from fear adrenaline. Ethan remained seated, gathering his notes. You did well, he said quietly. Better than you realize? Grace looked at him, startled. You didn't have to back me up. Yes, he said, glancing at her. I did. Their eyes held for a moment longer than was strictly professional. Don't lose that honesty, Ethan added. It's rare. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and left the room. Grace sat there alone for a long time, watching the rain trace paths down the glass. Her heart was still racing, her thoughts still tumbling, but beneath the exhaustion. Something new stirred. Not fear, not anger, pride. Down the hall. Lydia passed by and paused at the doorway. You handled yourself well, she said. Grace managed a small smile. I think I just made a few enemies. Lydia's lips curved faintly. In this building, that usually means you did something right. As Lydia walked away, Grace turned back toward the window. The city below shimmered under the clearing sky, and for the first time, she let herself believe that maybe she belonged here after all. By Wednesday, the whispers had found her. They moved through the building like wind through keyholes, soft, invisible, and everywhere at once. Grace Bennett could feel them before she could hear them. The subtle shift in tone when she entered a room. The quick exchange of glances between assistants at the coffee station, the silence that fell too quickly when she passed by. At first, she told herself she was imagining it, but by lunchtime, she wasn't. Moved up fast, didn't she? A voice murmured near the glass conference room. Grace froze, just outside the doorway. Another voice, a man's, low, amused, replied, "Yeah, some people wait 10 years for a promotion like that." She waited. What? 10 minutes? Laughter? Short? Sharp? Knowing? Grace's pulse quickened. She stepped away before they could see her, walking briskly down the hall, her heels too loud on the carpet. Each step echoed like an accusation. When she reached her office, she closed the door gently, not a slam, just a quiet surrender. She sat behind her desk and stared at her reflection in the dark glass window. The city was there, but blurred by the drizzle that had returned to Seattle's sky. It shouldn't have surprised her. She'd expected resistance, jealousy, maybe even hostility. But not this. Not the implication that her work, her years of effort could be erased by a single rumor. The whispers grew over the next few days. They changed shape as rumors do, morphing into something uglier each time they were told. She must have gotten close to the boss, Cole's pet project. Of course he defended her in that meeting. Mark Dalton's voice was always somewhere in the mix, unseen but unmistakable. He didn't need to say her name directly. His smirk carried the weight of his suggestions. On Friday morning, Grace overheard two interns whispering near the break room as she refilled her mug. "Do you think it's true?" one asked. "I don't know," the other said, voice hushed but curious. "He promoted her out of nowhere. There has to be something." Grace set her mug down harder than she meant to. The sharp clink made them jump. Their faces turned crimson when they realized who was standing behind them. Grace forced a polite smile. "You might want to be more careful about what you assume," she said softly, "especially about people you barely know." She didn't wait for their response. She walked out, coffee trembling in her hand. By noon, the humiliation had settled into something heavier, a quiet ache behind her ribs. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong. She'd earned her place. But in an office where perception could be more powerful than truth, innocence didn't matter. In the afternoon meeting, she caught Mark watching her again, that faint, mocking smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. When the meeting ended, he brushed past her and murmured, "Careful, Grace." The higher you climb, the louder the fall. Her jaw clenched, but she didn't answer. She refused to give him the satisfaction. That evening, most of the office emptied as rain began to fall again, the steady, endless Seattle kind that blurred everything into shades of silver. Grace stayed behind, pretending to review proposals, but really just avoiding the quiet of her apartment. The glow of the desk lamp softened the room, casting her shadow long across the carpet. The knock on her door startled her. Ethan Cole stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, his expression unreadable. "You're still here," he said. Grace smiled faintly. "So are you." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Old habits. I tend to chase deadlines until they run out of me." She gave a small laugh, but it faded quickly. Ethan studied her for a moment. "You've been quiet this week," he said gently. "Quieter than usual." Grace hesitated. She'd rehearsed half a dozen ways to deflect that question. "I'm fine, just tired. Too many projects." But the words refused to come. Instead, she said, "People talk." Ethan's expression darkened slightly. "About you?" She didn't have to answer. The silence did it for her. He exhaled slowly, leaning against the edge of her desk. Let me guess. Mark's behind it. Grace looked down at her hands. Maybe? Or maybe it doesn't matter. Rumors have their own gravity. They don't need proof to pull people in. Ethan's jaw tightened. If he's spreading lies, I'll handle it. No, she said quickly. Please don't. Grace, I mean it. Her voice steadied. If you confront him, it'll only make it worse. They'll say you're protecting me because if she faltered. Whatever they already think. Ethan's eyes softened. You shouldn't have to carry this alone. I know, she said quietly. But I'd rather carry it than feed it. He nodded slowly. Understanding. You're stronger than you realize. Grace gave a tired smile. I've had practice. For a while, they didn't speak. The only sound was the rain tapping against the window, steady, relentless, comforting in its constancy. Ethan finally pushed off the desk. For what it's worth, he said, you've done exceptional work, the board noticed. Don't let small minds shrink your world. Grace looked up at him, her voice soft. It's not the small minds that hurt. It's the small hearts. Ethan smiled faintly sad, admiring. That's what makes you different. He turned toward the door, hand resting briefly on the knob. Go home. Grace, the rain will clear by morning. It always does. When he left, the office felt both emptier and lighter. Grace sat back, closing her eyes for a moment. The hum of the city filled the silence traffic. Rain, distant sirens, life moving on. She could confront the rumors. She could fight back. But deep down, she knew the truth didn't need defending, not forever. What mattered was how she carried herself through the noise. She stood, turned off the lamp, and looked once more through the window. The skyline shimmered beneath the rain, blurred but beautiful. Her reflection stared back tired. Yes, but unbroken. For the first time, she whispered, someone isn't asking me to stay quiet. A faint smile touched her lips. They're asking me to stand tall. The following month brought new air into the firm, the kind that carried both hope and tension. Grace Bennett had thrown herself into the new community-based project Ethan Cole had assigned to her, a redesign of Seattle's aging public shelters. It was her first initiative fully under her name. No shared credit. No silent partners. The project brief was ambitious and deeply personal. Grace had grown up in Tacoma, raised by a single mother who'd spent years volunteering at local women's shelters. Those places had shaped her not through architecture, but through compassion. Now she wanted to return the favor, one blueprint at a time. Every morning, she arrived before sunrise. She covered her office walls with sketches and mood boards, light, warmth, open spaces filled with natural color. People heal better in dignity, she'd said in the planning meeting, not in concrete boxes. Ethan had smiled when she said that, not the polite corporate smile he used with the board, but something genuine proud. She noticed it more and more lately, the way he listened when she spoke. His focus steady and unhurried. He wasn't just the CEO in those moments. He was a man remembering why he'd built this company in the first place. By the second week, Grace was leading a small task force: engineers, designers, a marketing consultant, even a social worker from the city council, together. They spent hours gathering stories from residents and volunteers. Grace insisted on visiting the shelters herself. Ethan joined her one gray Friday morning. The air was damp with the smell of wet asphalt and sea salt. The shelter's paint was peeling. The sign faded. The air inside heavy with the scent of bleach and worn fabric. A volunteer named Clara, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and rough hands, led them through the narrow halls. "These walls have seen more tears than I can count," Clara said softly. "But they've also heard laughter. You can't save people with pity. You do it with respect." Grace scribbled that down in her notebook. Respect, not rescue. Later, as they stood outside beneath a leaking awning, Ethan glanced over at her. "You look like you're carrying the whole city on your shoulders." Grace smiled faintly. "Maybe just this block." He chuckled quietly, then turned serious. "You know, I've sat in dozens of design reviews over the years. Most people talk about structure, cost, aesthetics. You talk about people." Grace looked down at her sketchbook, her voice soft. "Buildings don't last unless they serve someone. Profit comes and goes. Dignity stays." Something passed between them, then quiet, unspoken, undeniable. For the first time, Ethan wasn't looking at her as an employee. He was looking at her as someone who reminded him of himself before the suits, before the corporate walls. That night, back in the office, Grace stayed late again. She adjusted lighting plans, recalculated insulation for energy efficiency, drafted a proposal for city grants. Her fingers ached, but her mind was clear. Martha poked her head in around 8 o'clock. "Still here, honey. The world's not going to rebuild itself tonight." Grace laughed softly. "Almost done. Just need to polish the presentation for Monday." "Well, get some sleep. You'll need your sparkle for the board." When Martha left, Grace leaned back and exhaled. The office was quiet, lit only by the glow of her desk lamp. Papers covered every inch of her workspace, evidence of hours, of heart, of something she could finally call her own. Down the hall, in the darkened boardroom, Ethan was still working, through the glass walls. Grace saw his silhouette shoulders slightly hunched, one hand rubbing his temple as he studied her design renderings projected on the wall. He didn't notice her watching. She could see his face in the reflection of the glass, thoughtful, proud. Her chest tightened slightly, a strange ache she didn't have words for. After a moment, she turned off her light and left quietly. By Monday morning, her proposal was ready. It was the most personal work she had ever done, blending architecture with empathy, function with hope. She titled it Haven Reimagined. She rehearsed twice in her office, then once more in her mind as she walked toward the boardroom. But not everyone was rooting for her. Downstairs, in the design department, Mark Dalton watched her name flash on the digital meeting schedule. Grace Bennett, Senior Design Advisor, Project Presentation, 10 Honora. His jaw tightened. He'd spent weeks pretending to move on, but the envy never faded. Grace had taken his spotlight, his control. And Ethan Cole, the man who'd once praised Mark's ambition, now barely glanced his way. He leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming on the desk. "Haven Reimagined," he muttered under his breath. "We'll see how long that lasts." When his assistant passed by, he called out casually, "Hey, can you forward me the visual assets for Bennett's shelter project? I just want to review something before the meeting." He smiled when she nodded. Minutes later, he was in the system, opening her files. He didn't change much, just enough. A single data sheet with outdated cost projections, a few missing renderings, a corrupted slide that wouldn't open during the presentation, just enough to make her stumble. Upstairs, Grace arrived early in the boardroom. She checked her slides twice, then once more. Everything seemed fine. She didn't notice the subtle glitches. When Ethan walked in, carrying his usual black coffee, he smiled. "Ready as I'll ever be," she said, though her voice carried more nerves than confidence. He gave her a reassuring nod. "You've got this." The executives began filing in: Robert from finance, Lydia from HR, 2 board members dialing in from New York. Mark slipped in last, all charm and false humility. "Just here to support the team," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Grace opened her laptop. The first slide appeared clean and professional. Haven reimagined? A human approach to shelter design? Her heartbeat steadied. "This project," she began, "isn't about charity. It's about architecture that restores dignity, spaces that remind people they matter." Her voice was calm, her words clear. She moved through the opening slides seamlessly, explaining cost-efficient designs and community partnerships. Then, midway through, the next slide froze. Grace clicked again. Nothing. The rendering file had failed to load. Her stomach dropped. Mark leaned back in his chair, feigning concern. "Technical issues." Ethan frowned slightly. "Take your time." Grace's fingers trembled over the keyboard. She tried another backup link. The same error. The room felt smaller now, the air thick. But then she did what no one expected. She straightened, turned away from the screen, and spoke. "You don't need to see the slides," she said quietly. "You just need to imagine a space where no one feels invisible." Her voice grew steadier with each word. "Where the light falls soft in the mornings. Where walls are warm, not sterile. Where every door leads to the belief that tomorrow can be better than today." The silence that followed was electric. Ethan's expression softened. Admiration unmistakable. Mark's smirk vanished. Grace smiled faintly. "That's what Haven Reimagined is about. A shelter that doesn't just protect people, it sees them." The room erupted in quiet applause. And for the first time, Ethan didn't see her as someone proving herself. He saw her as someone changing the very way the firm thought about design. The following Thursday morning shimmered with nervous energy. The boardroom on the 25th floor was filled to capacity: senior executives, board members, and 2 major investors from Los Angeles seated at the far end of the table. The air was rich with the scent of polished wood and expensive coffee. At the front of the room, Grace Bennett stood beside the projector screen, her hands steadying the wireless clicker. Behind her, Haven Reimagined glowed in soft blue light, her project, her voice, her vision. Ethan Cole sat near the center, his gaze quietly reassuring. Across the table, Lydia Evans reviewed her notes with calm precision. Even Robert, the CFO, wore a faint smile. This was it, the moment Grace had been working toward for months. She began with poise, her tone even but alive with conviction. "Our shelters aren't just structures," she said. "They're statements that everyone deserves safety, dignity, and beauty." Architecture can't change the world, but it can change the way people see themselves in it. A few investors nodded. One murmured, "Beautifully said." Grace moved through the slides smoothly, describing how the project combined sustainability with social responsibility. She highlighted partnerships with local suppliers, cost-effective materials, and designs informed by community input. Her voice grew stronger with each word. Ethan leaned back slightly, watching her proud, impressed. Then, just as she switched to the next slide, the doors burst open. The sudden noise shattered the calm like glass. Mark Dalton strode in, face flushed, tie loose, eyes burning with manufactured outrage. "Stop the presentation." Gasps rippled through the room. One of the investors frowned. "Who is this?" Ethan's voice cut through the murmurs. Cold and controlled. "Mark, you're interrupting an official board presentation." "I've every right to interrupt," Mark snapped. "Because what she's presenting, that's my work." The room erupted in confusion. Grace froze mid-motion, the clicker slipping slightly in her hand. Mark pointed at the screen. "Those designs, those schematics, they're mine. She stole them from my team months ago. I have drafts, reports, emails. She's been passing my work off as her own to climb her way up this floor." The words hit like thunder. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the rain outside seemed to hold its breath. Grace felt her stomach twist. Heat surged up her neck, humiliation, disbelief, fury all at once. Ethan rose slowly, the quiet authority in his movement silencing the chaos. "That's a serious accusation," he said evenly. "You'd better have proof." "Oh, I do," Mark said, tossing a folder onto the table. Sheets spilled out, filled with sketches, drafts, and notes. Compare them. You'll see the same plans, the same phrasing, even the same layout. She took them from my files. Lydia moved forward, retrieving the papers. Her sharp eyes scanned them quickly before sliding them toward Grace. "Grace," she said gently, "would you like to respond?" The world seemed to narrow around her, just her, the long table, and the accusing eyes. Grace inhaled slowly, forcing the panic back down. She looked at Mark. "You're right about one thing," she said softly. "Those sketches look familiar." Mark crossed his arms, smirking. "Of course they do." "Because you stole them." "No," she said, her voice steady now. "Because I drew them." The room went still. Ethan's eyes flicked to her, sharp, alert. Grace turned to her laptop, fingers moving quickly. The projector screen behind her shifted from slides to her personal folder. She opened a series of files, sketches, concept drafts, correspondence. "Let's talk about timestamps," she said, her voice gaining quiet strength. "These were created under my account 6 months ago. You'll see the metadata date, time, and my login signature." She clicked again. A side-by-side comparison appeared, her original sketches on the left, Mark's so-called drafts on the right. "They're identical," Mark said smugly. "Yes," Grace replied, "because you copied them, down to the exact curvature of the support beams and the labeling format I developed." Her cursor circled a small detail on the digital blueprint, a subtle line mark in the corner. "See this?" she said. "That imperfection? My pen slipped the night I drew it. You can trace it in every version, even the one you're holding." The silence was thick, now shocked, heavy, and still. Grace opened her email archive next. "Here's the message I sent to your team the night those drafts were submitted. Notice the timestamp 11:47 p.m. I was working late because you'd missed your own deadline. The attachments are the same files you're claiming as your own." Mark's face reddened, his jaw tightening. "You could have forged that." Lydia spoke up calmly. "No, these are company-secured accounts. All changes are logged through our internal system. It's verifiable." Robert leaned forward, his tone cautious. "So you're saying she created the designs, and you refiled them under your name?" Mark stammered. "No, that's not," Grace interrupted, her voice firm now, resonant. "I didn't steal," she said. "I built. Every line, every idea, every sleepless night, they're mine." Her words hung in the air, trembling but unbreakable. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low but clear. "That's enough." He turned to the board. "You've all seen the evidence. The timestamps don't lie. The integrity does." He faced Mark. "You're suspended effective immediately, pending a full investigation." Two security officers standing near the door moved forward. Mark's expression collapsed into disbelief. "You can't do this, Ethan. I built this company with you." Ethan's gaze was cold steel. "No, Mark, you built your career on other people's work? Now you're finished?" The officers escorted him out, his protests echoing down the hallway until the door clicked shut. For a moment, no one moved. Then Lydia cleared her throat. "Ms. Bennett, please continue." Grace blinked, the shock catching up with her. "I think the presentation's done speaking for itself." A faint ripple of laughter spread through the tension, and then applause. It started with one of the investors, then another. Soon the entire room was clapping, the sound warm, powerful, redemptive. Grace stood motionless for a second, her heart hammering. Then she smiled, shy but radiant. Ethan was still watching her, not with pride, not even with relief, but with something deeper: respect. When the applause faded, Ethan approached her quietly. "That," he said, "was courage." Grace exhaled shakily. "I just told the truth. Most people don't, when it's that hard." He offered her a hand, not for a handshake, but in quiet acknowledgement. She hesitated, then took it. The storm outside had passed, sunlight spilling across the conference table. The rain streaks on the windows glowed gold in the light. And for the first time, Grace Bennett didn't feel like she was fighting to be seen. She simply was. By Monday morning, the office felt different. The usual hum of chatter was gone, replaced by a quieter current, something that moved beneath the surface, cautious and curious. Grace Bennett could feel eyes on her as she walked down the hallway. Some looked away when she passed, others nodded subtle, approving. It wasn't mockery anymore. It was recognition. Mark Dalton's office stood empty. The glass door bore no nameplate, just a faint outline where the letters had been peeled away. Inside, boxes sat stacked neatly on the floor, evidence of a career packed up overnight. HR had confirmed his suspension pending a full investigation. Lydia Evans was leading it herself, and word spread fast that she intended to be thorough. Still, Grace felt no triumph in it. Vindication? Yes. Relief? Maybe. But mostly, exhaustion. The fight had taken more out of her than she realized. When she returned to her office, the first thing she noticed was the light. It was brighter that morning, pouring across her desk like a quiet benediction. The Haven Reimagined plans lay neatly arranged. The same sketches that had once been used to accuse her now sat as proof of her integrity. She traced her fingers along the edge of one page, her heart still heavy. A soft knock sounded at the door. Ethan Cole stood in the doorway, one hand in his pocket, the other holding 2 paper cups. "Coffee," he said with a faint smile. Grace hesitated, then smiled back. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said simply, stepping inside. He set 1 cup on her desk, no cream, 2 sugars. "Right." She blinked. "You remembered?" "I tend to remember the people who saved my company from scandal." His tone was light, but his eyes weren't. They held warmth and something else she couldn't quite name. He gestured toward the chair across from her. "Mind if I sit?" She nodded. For a moment, neither spoke. The air felt thick, charged with everything that hadn't been said. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. You didn't just win a case, Grace. You changed a culture. She looked down, modestly. I just told the truth. He shook his head slightly. No. You showed everyone that the truth still matters even when it costs you. Grace exhaled, her fingers curling around the warm coffee cup. It didn't feel noble at the time. It just felt lonely. Ethan nodded slowly. It always does. Standing up for what's right usually means standing alone first. She looked up at him then, and for a brief, dangerous second, their eyes held. It wasn't gratitude she saw in his face. It was something quieter, more personal, a flicker of admiration and longing. Grace's pulse quickened. She looked away first, pretending to study a file on her desk. The board meeting must have been a nightmare to clean up afterward. Ethan smiled faintly. You made it easier than you think? Investors were impressed not just by your design, but by your composure. The firm's reputation actually improved. She raised an eyebrow. Because of the scandal, because of the honesty. He corrected. They saw something real for a change. For a long moment, the rain and the quiet hum of the city filled the space between them. Grace finally asked, Do you ever get tired of it? Being the one everyone watches? Ethan considered that every day, he admitted. But that's the job. People need to believe their leaders have it all together even when they don't. He looked at her, and his voice softened. You make it look effortless, though. The courage part? She laughed quietly. Effortless. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the clicker. Maybe, he said, smiling. But you still stood tall. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged, warm. Something in it felt unspoken yet undeniable. Grace felt it too, the awareness of proximity, the way his voice seemed lower in quiet moments, the way her heart responded to it without permission. She wanted to say something safe, something to break the spell. Instead, what came out was softer. What happens now, she asked. Ethan leaned back slightly. We move forward. You'll lead the Haven Reimagined rollout. I'll announce the new ethics initiative at the next board meeting, and he hesitated. Eyes meeting hers will rebuild trust. Together. That word together lingered. Grace nodded, her throat tightening. And Mark, he'll face consequences. But that's not your burden anymore. She looked out the window. The rain was slowing, leaving faint trails across the glass. It still feels strange. Winning? I mean, I've spent so many years losing quietly. Ethan's voice dropped, almost a whisper. Then maybe it's time you learn how to win loudly. Their eyes met again, and for a heartbeat, the world outside fell away. Grace broke the silence first, forcing a laugh. Careful, Ethan. People might start rumors again. He smiled, but his gaze didn't waver. Let them. I've learned the truth doesn't need defending, only living. Her heart fluttered at that, and she looked away, half smiling, half afraid. I'm not sure I can handle another storm, she murmured. He stood, his expression soft but resolute. Then let me be the one who holds the umbrella this time. Her chest tightened at the gentleness in his tone. But as the door closed behind him, Grace's mind wouldn't quiet. What if caring for someone at work ruins everything I rebuilt? What if the one person who saw me becomes the one thing that breaks me again? She stood by the window, watching the clouds part over the sound, sunlight glinting off the water like scattered glass. Her reflection stared back at her stronger, older, wiser, and beneath the fear, something new had begun to bloom. Not love, not yet, but possibility. The rain came back that Thursday night the same way it always did in Seattle. Hard, insistent, cleansing. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the sound, and flashes of lightning danced along the skyline. It was almost poetic, the storm returning, like the world reminding her where it all began. Grace Bennett sat alone in her office on the 25th floor, the city shimmering below her in fractured reflections. Blueprints and sketches lay scattered across the desk, glowing faintly in the dim light. She wasn't working anymore, not really. She was staring through the glass, lost somewhere between gratitude and fear. She had spent the past 2 weeks rebuilding her projects, mentoring junior designers, attending leadership meetings. Outwardly, she looked stronger than ever, but inside, the quiet tension between her and Ethan Cole had grown into something she could no longer ignore. It wasn't flirtation, not exactly. It was something deeper, quieter, built from late nights and shared silences. The way he remembered her coffee order, the way his voice softened whenever he said her name, the way she caught herself glancing toward his office more often than she wanted to admit. She told herself it was admiration, respect, gratitude. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. A gentle knock broke her thoughts. When she turned, Ethan stood in the doorway, rain still glistening on his overcoat. "Still here?" he asked, his voice low and warm. She smiled faintly. "You too?" He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "It's storming again. I figured I'd check before heading out." Grace gestured toward the window. "Seems the rain likes to follow us?" Ethan gave a soft laugh and walked closer, his reflection joining hers in the glass. Maybe it just knows where the real weather happens. They stood side by side, watching lightning streak across the sky. The light illuminated their faces for a heartbeat, close. Too close. Grace could feel her pulse in her throat. "You didn't come up here just to talk about the weather," she said softly. "No," Ethan admitted. His voice dropped. "I didn't." He turned toward her fully, searching her eyes. "Grace, I've tried to stay professional. I've tried to keep my distance. But every day I fail a little more." Her breath caught. "You make this place human again," he said. "You remind me why I started this company in the first place before it became about contracts and profit margins. You make it feel alive." Grace took a small step back, her chest tightening. "Ethan." He raised a hand gently, not to stop her, but to give her space. "I know it's complicated. It's wrong by every HR handbook ever written, but it's real." Grace shook her head slowly. "You can't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because people will talk," she said, voice trembling. "They already do. I can't be another rumor for them to chew on." He nodded, his expression pained but calm. "I know what they'll say. I know what it'll cost me. But I also know what I see when I look at you." She turned away, staring at the rain tracing lines down the window. "I worked too hard to be seen as someone's shortcut to success. If this gets twisted, it will," he said softly. "That's what people do. But let's prove them wrong with transparency, with honesty." Grace let out a shaky laugh. "You really think the truth stands a chance? In an office full of whispers?" Ethan stepped closer, not too close, but close enough that his presence warmed the space between them. "I think it always stands a chance because people still want to believe in something good." She turned toward him. Their eyes met, and in that brief silence, everything unspoken filled the room. She saw not the CEO, but the man who had stayed late to defend her, who had risked his own reputation for her truth. And he saw not the employee, but the woman who had reminded him what integrity looked like in a world that had forgotten. Lightning flashed again, illuminating their faces in silver light. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "You don't have to know," he said gently. "You just have to be honest about what you feel." Grace looked down at her hands, the same hands that had built models, signed contracts, fought for her name. They trembled now. "I feel," she began, then stopped, unable to finish. Ethan didn't press. He just waited. The clock ticked softly in the background, counting the moments between sense and surrender. Finally, she exhaled. "I'm scared." He nodded. "So am I." That honesty, simple and raw, broke something open between them. Grace smiled sadly. "You'd think the CEO of a global firm wouldn't get scared, you'd think," Ethan said with a half smile. "But then, you'd be wrong about a lot of things." He took a slow step closer, his tone tender. "If this ever becomes too heavy, if it threatens what you've built, I'll be the first to step back. You have my word." She looked up at him. "That's not fair. You shouldn't have to promise that." "I'm not promising to protect you," he said. "I'm promising to respect you." The thunder cracked again. Closer this time. The rain streaked harder across the glass, almost drowning out their breathing. For one suspended moment, Grace thought of that first night, the resignation letter, the storm, the locked door, the moment her life had split in two. How strange that it had all begun with a man saying, "You're making a mistake." And now, that same man stood before her, offering not correction, but choice. Grace's voice trembled. "If we do this, if we let this mean something, it can't be built on secrecy." Ethan's eyes softened. "Then it won't be." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card, the company's code of conduct form. He placed it on her desk, his signature already there. "I've already disclosed to HR that I have personal feelings for an employee," he said quietly. "They told me it would complicate things. I said I was aware." Grace stared at the paper, then at him. "You actually did it?" He nodded. "I don't hide what matters." She felt tears prick her eyes, not from romance, but from the sheer, rare weight of honesty. "I don't know where this goes," she whispered. "Neither do I," he said. "But wherever it leads, let's walk there truthfully." Outside, the rain began to ease. The city lights shimmered like promises half fulfilled. Grace met his gaze again. Two people standing in the storm, choosing not to run from it this time. For now, that was enough. The following Monday began with the kind of clear blue sky that only comes after a long storm. Seattle glistened streets washed clean, glass towers reflecting sunlight like polished mirrors. For once, Grace Bennett didn't dread walking into the office. The whispers had quieted over the weekend, though she knew they weren't gone. In companies like Cole and Dalton, gossip never truly disappeared. It just found quieter corners to hide in. But this time, she didn't flinch from it, because for the first time in her career, she had nothing to hide. Ethan had filed the official HR disclosure that Friday. He'd walked into Lydia Evans' office, set down a signed statement, and said calmly, "I need to be transparent." By the time Grace arrived that morning, HR had already arranged a formal review. Lydia met her with her usual composed professionalism, clipboard in hand, glasses perched low on her nose. "Let's make this clear." "Grace," Lydia began, her voice even but kind, "this doesn't violate policy as long as you both maintain clear professional boundaries." That means separate reporting structures, no influence on promotions or salary decisions, and full disclosure in writing. Grace nodded, her palms pressed together on the table. I understand. I'm also aware that rumors will circulate. Lydia continued. They always do. But the only thing that silences gossip is time and consistency. Grace met her gaze. Then that's what we'll give them. When Ethan entered the room a few minutes later, the tension lightened. He greeted Lydia with quiet respect, sat beside Grace, and signed the final document. No secret glances, no hidden touches, just professionalism steady, deliberate, human. Lydia gathered the papers. All right, she said. It's official. Let's move forward. Those words move forward echoed in Grace's mind all day. She'd expected to feel shame, maybe fear, but what she felt was something entirely new: clarity. No hiding, no guilt, just truth. Out in the open. Whatever came with it. By midweek, the murmurs had started again, quieter, but sharper this time. In the cafeteria, she caught the tail end of a conversation. Guess honesty pays after all, one designer whispered. Yeah, another replied with a smirk. Maybe I should disclose something too. Grace kept walking, pretending not to hear, but across the room, Martha caught her eye, the older receptionist who had been with the firm since the beginning. Martha gave her a look that said, "Ignore them." You know who you are. Grace smiled faintly and took her coffee to go. Back upstairs, her day filled with meetings, deadlines, and design reviews. She worked harder than ever, not because she had to prove herself, but because she wanted to. Her new project, the Aurora Community Center, focused on creating art spaces for low-income neighborhoods. She assembled a diverse design team, including 2 young interns, Mia and Caleb, who watched her with the same awe she used to reserve for others. Grace made sure to give them credit in every meeting. One afternoon, as they reviewed sketches, Mia hesitated before speaking. Ms. Bennett, can I ask you something personal? Grace looked up, smiling. Of course. Everyone keeps saying you're brave, Mia said shyly. But how do you know when doing the brave thing is actually the right thing? Grace leaned back, thinking. She saw herself in Mia the same uncertainty, the same hunger to matter. I don't think bravery always feels right, she said finally. Sometimes it feels terrifying. Sometimes it looks like failure. But the difference is bravery doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you show up anyway. Mia nodded slowly, her eyes bright. Grace smiled. So if you're waiting for fear to disappear before you do something brave, you'll wait forever. As Mia and Caleb left, Grace glanced out the window. The rain had started again, a soft drizzle this time, gentle and persistent. That evening, she stayed late, reviewing plans under the golden glow of her desk lamp. She didn't hear Ethan's footsteps until he spoke. Still saving the city one blueprint at a time, she smiled without looking up. Someone has to. He walked in quietly, holding 2 mugs of coffee, a familiar ritual now. Lydia had assigned Ethan to a separate oversight committee to avoid direct supervision, but their paths still crossed naturally, inevitably. He set the mug beside her. I hear the Aurora team loves working with you. They're good people, she said, hungry to make something that matters. He nodded. Sounds familiar. Grace laughed softly. Don't start flattering me again. HR might think you're still trying to influence me. Ethan chuckled. You'd be impossible to influence anyway. The rain picked up outside. tapping against the windows like fingertips. They stood there for a long moment, watching it together, not touching, not crossing lines, but sharing the same quiet space. It was enough. Grace finally spoke, her voice soft. "You know, I used to think courage meant walking away when things got hard." Ethan turned to her, and now she smiled faintly, her eyes on the rain. "Now I think maybe the brave choice isn't walking away, but walking forward." He studied her for a moment, something proud and gentle in his expression. "Then keep walking, Grace. I'll be right beside you wherever the lines allow." Her chest tightened at that, not from romance, but from gratitude. For the first time in her career, she felt seen, not for her potential, not for her struggle, but for her wholeness. When Ethan left, Grace remained by the window. The rain outside glowed beneath the streetlights, turning the city into a watercolor of gold and silver. She thought about every version of herself that had existed in this building, the woman who almost quit, the one who almost stayed silent, the one who finally learned to speak. Each of them had been brave in her own way. Maybe bravery isn't loud. Maybe it's steady. Maybe it's simply choosing to show up, even when no one claps for you. Grace smiled at her reflection, picked up her pen, and began sketching again. Not to prove anything, not to survive, but to build something worth staying for. By late spring, the rain had finally given way to sun. But inside Cole and Dalton Architects, the air was heavier than it had ever been. The HR investigation into Mark Dalton had stretched for weeks, long enough for the initial scandal to fade into something more structural, more serious. This wasn't just about stolen designs anymore. It was about money, about power, about everything that had gone unchecked for too long. Grace Bennett had been asked to testify twice, both times. She walked into the conference room with her notes neatly organized, her voice steady, her conscience clear. Lydia Evans led the inquiry. Ethan Cole sat in each session not as judge, but as guardian of process. He said little, but his presence carried weight. When Grace entered that room, she didn't feel vindictive. She felt tired. Tired of the lies that had poisoned a company she once loved. Tired of pretending that justice always felt clean. Across the table, Mark Dalton looked like a man unraveling. The confidence was gone, replaced by a restless tapping of fingers and darting glances. His suit, once perfectly tailored, hung loose on his frame. The evidence was stacked against him: months of audits, financial discrepancies, falsified expense reports, project misallocations traced back to his department. Grace had expected rage or denial. Instead, Mark looked hollow. When Lydia asked her to describe her experience under his supervision, Grace spoke quietly. "He dismissed my work, took credit for ideas that weren't his. But what hurt most wasn't the theft, it was the silence it taught me. I stopped believing my voice mattered." Mark looked up at her then, eyes red, unfocused. "You think you're a hero?" he muttered. Grace shook her head. "No. I think I just stopped being afraid of the truth." The questioning continued for nearly 2 hours. Lydia's tone remained calm, impartial. Ethan asked only one question, his voice measured. "Mr. Dalton, the records show company funds were diverted through a consulting firm under your wife's name. Can you explain?" That Mark's face tightened. "It was temporary. I meant to fix it." Ethan's tone didn't change. "You didn't?" Silence. The kind of silence that ends a career. When the session adjourned, Lydia gathered her papers with quiet finality. We'll issue our findings by week's end." Mark didn't look at anyone as he left the room. His footsteps echoed down the corridor, fading into nothing. 3 days later, the official notice came: termination. Effective immediately. Criminal proceedings pending. By noon, security arrived on the 25th floor. Employees stepped aside as Mark walked toward the elevators, escorted by 2 guards. He didn't protest this time. Didn't look angry. Just defeated. Grace stood by her office window, watching from a distance. She didn't move. Didn't speak. Ethan joined her quietly a moment later, standing beside her without saying a word. Through the glass, they could see Mark's reflection in the lobby below, one man disappearing from a place he'd once ruled. When the elevator doors closed, Grace let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Justice," Ethan said softly, "doesn't always look like victory." Grace nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "No. It looks like someone finally telling the truth and realizing it doesn't make the world any less broken." He turned toward her. "You did what few people have the courage to do. Grace, you spoke up." She shook her head. "I didn't bring him down. Ethan, his own choices did." "Maybe," he said gently, "but your truth held up a mirror for the rest of the day." The office hummed with subdued conversation. People whispered, not about Grace this time, but about what came next. Ethics training, structural reforms, a new transparency policy. Ethan spent the afternoon drafting a company-wide memo. "We can't rebuild what we refuse to face." It read, "Today, we start again." When he sent it, he walked down the hall to Grace's office. She was there, as always, surrounded by sketches, eyes distant. He leaned against the doorway. "You okay?" She gave a half smile. "Depends on how you define okay." Ethan stepped inside, keeping his tone gentle. "You don't have to feel good about what happened to him." "I don't," she said. "I just thought it would feel different." He nodded. Justice rarely feels satisfying. It just feels necessary. Grace turned toward the window again. The late afternoon sun spilled gold across the city, but somehow the light felt heavier, not brighter. "Do you think people like him ever realize what they've done?" she asked quietly. Ethan considered. "Maybe not in time to change, but maybe their fall warns the rest of us to be better." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the same weariness she felt. The cost of leadership, of holding others accountable while trying not to lose your own humanity. Later that evening, when most employees had gone home, Grace walked the empty corridors. Every light reflected faintly in the glass, a reminder of all the stories that had played out here: ambition, betrayal, redemption. She stopped by Mark's old office. It was bare now, only the faint shadow of furniture on the carpet. A single nail left in the wall where his award once hung. She stood there for a long moment. "He stole my ideas, my confidence, years of my peace. But what he couldn't take was the lesson: silence is never safety." Grace turned off the light and closed the door gently behind her. Back in her office, the city lights stretched endlessly beyond the glass. For the first time in months, she felt still. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just still. Ethan appeared in the reflection behind her. "You heading home soon?" "Yeah," she said softly. "Just finishing one last email." He nodded, pausing before adding, "I know this feels heavy, but this all of it matters." She smiled faintly. "You always know what to say." He shrugged, a hint of warmth breaking through the exhaustion. only when it's true. As he left, Grace looked back out at the skyline at the city she'd learned to survive, to fight, and finally, to forgive. She thought about justice, how it wasn't about punishing the wrong people, but protecting the right ones. And in that quiet moment, with the sun sinking beyond the sound, Grace Bennett understood something simple and profound. The end of someone else's story isn't always your victory. Sometimes, it's just the clearing of space for something better to grow. 2 years later, the city looked different. Or maybe it was Grace Bennett who had changed. Seattle's skyline shimmered beneath a clear autumn sky, glass towers gleaming against streaks of amber light. From the 25th floor of Cole & Dalton Architects, now officially renamed Cole Bennett Studio, the view stretched endlessly across the Sound. The rain still came and went, as it always had. But Grace no longer dreaded the storms. She had learned how to work with them, how to design through them, live through them, become through them. A new brass plate hung beside her office door: Grace Bennett, Vice President of Design, Ethics, and Innovation. The title still felt unreal sometimes, but the work was everything she had once dreamed of. Under her direction, the company had restructured its design philosophy. Projects were now reviewed, not just for profit, but for impact, a measurable evaluation of how architecture served human dignity. She had built a small team dedicated to this mission. They called it the Heartline Initiative. It started as a local project reimagining public spaces in underfunded neighborhoods. Within a year, it had become a national model for ethical design. Last month, Architectural Digest ran an article titled "The Woman Who Redefined Corporate Architecture." Grace had read it once, then tucked the magazine away in a drawer. She didn't need the spotlight. She just wanted the work to live beyond her name. That morning, the office buzzed with excitement. Downstairs, the lobby was filled with students from community colleges and design programs, bright-eyed interns chosen for the Cole Bennett Foundation's annual Mentorship Summit. Grace watched from the glass balcony as they checked in their nervous laughter, reminding her of the young woman she had once been, years ago. Walking into a building she thought might swallow her whole, now she was the one holding the door open. At noon, she joined Ethan Cole in the main conference hall. He was already there, setting up the podium. Time had added a few silver strands to his hair, but his smile, quiet and sure, remained the same. "Everything ready?" he asked when he saw her. Grace nodded. "Almost." "You still make everyone nervous when you stand too close to the microphone, though?" He laughed softly. "Old habits." "You mean CEO habits." He grinned. "I'll take that as a compliment." The Cole Bennett Foundation had been their shared creation and idea, born out of that stormy night 2 years ago, when they decided to face the world with transparency rather than fear. Now it funded design scholarships, mentorship programs, and leadership training for underrepresented architects, people who, like Grace once had, felt unseen in the rooms where decisions were made. Ethan turned to her, lowering his voice. "You'll start the speech, right?" She nodded, smoothing the papers in her hands. "You'll close it. Wouldn't dream of stealing your opening line." When the room filled, Grace stepped up to the microphone. The sight of hundreds of young faces, hopeful, nervous, ready, filled her chest with something between pride and awe. "Good afternoon," she began. "When I started in this industry, I believed architecture was about buildings, but it's really about people, about how we move through space, how we belong to it, and how it shapes who we become. Her voice was calm but full, steady with conviction. "Every design you'll create someday," she continued, "will hold someone's story. Treat it with care, because the walls you build may outlive you, but the intention behind them never fades." A hush filled the room. The kind that comes when truth lands softly but deeply. Ethan watched her from the front row, his eyes bright with quiet admiration. After the event, the students swarmed around her with questions, laughter, and thanks. Grace answered everyone patiently, signing portfolios, offering advice, promising to review designs. One student, a young woman named Renee, handed her a sketchbook. "Ms. Bennett, your story got me into architecture school," she said, voice trembling. "I almost quit, but I saw what you built here, and I thought maybe I could too." Grace smiled, her throat tightening. "You can," she said softly. "You already are." Later that evening, when the building had emptied and the city lights blinked on one by one, Grace and Ethan stood by the window again, the same window where storms once raged and confessions had changed everything. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The chaos, the constant battles." Ethan smiled, hands in his pockets. "Not for a second. I like this version better where the fights are about purpose instead of ego." Grace laughed quietly. "You make it sound so simple." "It wasn't," he said, turning toward her, "but you made it worth it." Their relationship had never been defined by spectacle. There was no grand announcement, no company gossip column to fuel. Over time, people just knew. The way he waited for her after meetings, the way she reached for his hand in crowded rooms when no one was looking, the way they shared glances that said everything words never needed to. There was no wedding photo on her desk, only a small framed picture from the foundation's first project, the two of them standing in front of a finished community library, sunlight spilling through open doors. That was enough. Grace looked out at the skyline, her reflection merging with the city's glow. "Do you remember that night?" she asked. "The rain?" The letter I almost turned in Ethan's smile softened. "I remember thinking you were about to make the biggest mistake of your life." She chuckled. "Turns out, you were right." He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Turns out, so were you about everything that came after." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the city pulse below them. "I thought staying would break me, but it saved me instead. Because staying meant believing in myself, in others, in the possibility of something better." The elevator chimed faintly in the distance, somewhere downstairs. Martha's laughter echoed as she locked up for the night. Ethan slipped his hand into hers, their fingers intertwining naturally, effortlessly, a gesture built on years, not sparks. "Ready to go home?" he asked softly. Grace smiled, eyes still on the horizon. "I already am." The first day of the summer internship program always brought new energy into the building, a blend of nerves, hope, and the unmistakable smell of new notebooks and fresh ambition. Grace Bennett loved this time of year. It reminded her that architecture was more than steel and angles. It was a continuum of people, each generation sketching dreams atop the blueprints of the last. That morning, she stood by the glass balcony overlooking the open workspace. Dozens of interns moved between cubicles, guided by mentors and team leads. Laughter echoed faintly. Someone dropped a stack of folders. Another apologized too many times. Grace smiled to herself. It was chaos. But the good kind, the kind that meant something new was beginning. She turned to leave when she noticed a young woman standing near the lobby doors, frozen, clutching a sketchbook to her chest. Grace recognized that look instantly. The fear of being seen and unseen all at once. She walked over. "First day?" Grace asked, voice soft but warm. The girl looked up quickly. "Yes. Ma'am, I'm sorry. I think I'm supposed to check in with HR, but I keep getting lost." Grace smiled. "Don't apologize. This building's a maze. I got lost here my first month too, though it was on the way to the bathroom." That earned a nervous laugh. Grace extended a hand. "I'm Grace Bennett." The girl's eyes widened. The Grace Bennett, just Grace. "Please. I've read about you in Architectural Digest and the Cole Bennett Foundation website. You're the reason I applied here." Grace blinked, caught off guard. "That's kind of you to say." "I mean it," the girl said quickly. "Your work on community design, it's the reason I decided to major in architecture instead of law. My parents think I'm crazy, but I want to build things that help people." Grace smiled, the words settling deep in her chest. "That's not crazy," she said gently. "That's vision." The girl introduced herself as Samantha Rhodes, 22, senior at Oregon State. She was assigned to the Aurora Expansion Project, one of Grace's flagship programs. Grace guided her through the glass corridors, pointing out the collaboration zones, the model room, the materials lab. Samantha absorbed everything, her wide eyes darting from blueprint to sculpture to sunlight filtering through the high windows. When they reached Grace's office, the girl hesitated in the doorway. "Wow," she whispered. "You have a window view." Grace laughed softly. "Yes, but it took a lot of rain to get here." Samantha frowned slightly, unsure if it was a joke. Grace gestured for her to sit. "Tell me," Grace said, "what do you want to learn while you're here?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. I guess I just want to learn how to be confident," Samantha admitted. "You know, like you." Grace leaned back in her chair, folding her hands. The sincerity in the young woman's voice pierced something tender in her. "Confidence," Grace repeated quietly. "That's a tricky word." Samantha tilted her head. Why Grace looked toward the window, the skyline glowing in late morning light. Because people think confidence is loud about knowing all the answers? Walking into a room like you own it? She turned back to Samantha. But it's not. Real confidence is quiet. It's showing up again the day after you wanted to quit. It's staying kind when people mistake it for weakness. It's believing your work has worth, even when no one says your name out loud. Samantha nodded slowly, absorbing every word. Grace smiled softly. "You asked how I learned to be confident?" The girl nodded again. "By being invisible?" Grace said, "long enough to learn how to see myself." The words hung in the air, gentle, heavy, true. Samantha's eyes glistened. Didn't it hurt being invisible? Grace's gaze softened. It did. But sometimes pain is a kind of teacher. It makes you listen differently. It makes you notice others who feel small, so when you finally have a voice, you use it for them too. They sat in silence for a while, not awkward, but sacred. The space between them felt like a bridge built between two timelines, the woman who had almost quit, and the girl just beginning. Samantha broke the quiet with a small, trembling smile. "If I ever forget this, can I come back and ask you again?" Grace chuckled gently. "You won't forget." "But yes, my door's always open as long as you promise to walk through it." Later that afternoon, Samantha joined the design team meeting. Grace watched from across the room as the young intern hesitated before speaking, then finally raised her hand to share an idea. It was small, simple, a light variation in the courtyard plan, but thoughtful. When the team nodded approvingly, Samantha's face lit up. Grace caught her eye and gave her an encouraging nod. As the meeting ended, Ethan stepped beside Grace, his voice low. "New recruit?" Grace nodded. "Samantha Rhodes. Reminds me of someone I used to know." Ethan smiled knowingly. "The kind who sketches dreams bigger than her confidence?" "Exactly." He leaned in slightly. "Then she's in the right place." That evening, after everyone had gone, Grace lingered by the window again, the city glowing in soft gold. On her desk lay Samantha's first sketch, a small shelter concept, inspired by the Haven Reimagined project. Grace smiled and carefully pinned it to her inspiration wall right beside her own earliest drawing, worn and yellowed with age. She stood there for a moment, hands in her pockets, the sound of distant rain beginning to patter once more. We build so others can begin. That's the quiet promise of creation, to make space where someone else can grow. She turned off the light, pausing by the door. The reflection in the glass showed her older, steadier, softer, and somewhere behind her, the faint outline of a new dreamer just starting her journey. Grace smiled and walked forward. The building was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that only came before sunrise. The air carried that faint metallic scent of rain on glass, the streets below still slick with last night's storm. Grace Bennett walked through the familiar halls of Cole Bennett's studio, her footsteps soft against polished concrete. She had a key card that could open any door in the tower now. But this morning, she was walking toward the one she hadn't opened in years. Soft piano begins, slow, nostalgic tone, the 15th floor. Once it had been her world-gray cubicles, buzzing lights, endless deadlines. The hum of computers was replaced now by silence. The floor had been converted into a storage and training level, no longer the bustling hive it once was. She paused outside a particular cubicle near the center second row from the elevator. Left-hand side. Her cubicle? It looked smaller than she remembered. The desk still bore faint scratches from years of work. The corkboard above it was empty now, but she could still see the outlines of where her old sketches once hung, tiny pieces of herself she'd left behind. Grace ran her fingertips across the surface of the desk, tracing invisible maps of her past. It was here she had stayed late so many nights, watching others take credit for her work. Here she had cried quietly when another promotion passed her by. Here she had written that letter, the one she thought would set her free. She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. How strange, she thought, that freedom had come not from leaving, but from staying. She sat down slowly in the old chair, the metal creaking just as it always had. For a moment, she could almost see her younger self again, weary, scared, clutching that resignation envelope like it was a life raft. Back then, she thought the door closing behind her in Ethan Cole's office had been a trap. Now she knew it had been something else entirely. Her voice came out softly, almost a whisper meant for no one but the empty room. That night, the door didn't trap me. It kept me from running away from my own worth. The words echoed gently, settling into the still air. Grace stood and walked toward the window. The rain had begun again, thin and steady, just like that first night years ago. Seattle was waking up, lights flickering on across the skyline. Each drop on the glass caught a reflection not of the tired girl she used to be, but of the woman she had become. VP of Design Ethics and Innovation. Mentor, builder, partner, whole. She remembered every step that had led her here. The anger, the fear, the trembling courage of speaking up, the nights she doubted she belonged, the mornings she chose to show up anyway. Every choice had built this life brick by brick, truth by truth. Maybe that's what growth really is, she thought. Not erasing who you were, but forgiving her. Thanking her for surviving long enough for you to arrive? Grace turned back toward the cubicle. One last look. The old walls seemed less oppressive now, just neutral spaces waiting to hold new stories. Somewhere down the hall, the elevator chimed. Ethan's voice carried faintly. "You're up early?" She smiled. "So are you." He stepped into view. 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Habit? You mean control?" She teased. He grinned. "Call it what you like. I brought your usual—" He handed her the cup, warm against her palm. For a while, they just stood there together in the quiet, 2 people bound not by titles, but by everything they had built side by side. Ethan glanced at the cubicle. "Haven't been down here in a while." Grace nodded. "I needed to see it again." He studied her face carefully. "Does it hurt?" She shook her head. "No. It reminds me of what that sometimes," she said softly. "We mistake survival for weakness. But really, it's the bravest thing we ever do." Ethan smiled, his eyes kind. "You always did know how to find meaning in the hard places." Grace looked out the window again. The sky was changing, the first streaks of gold breaking through the gray. The rain had slowed, and sunlight began to bleed gently across the wet city. It was beautiful, not perfect, but real. Ethan glanced at her reflection in the glass. "You ever think about how it all started?" Grace chuckled quietly. "Every time it rains?" He smiled. "You think the storm's finally over?" She took a slow sip of coffee, eyes fixed on the horizon. "No," she said softly, "but I've learned to dance through it." They stood there together as dawn fully broke. The city below, glowing alive. The glass walls caught the light, scattering it across the room like fragments of hope. Grace turned toward Ethan, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't need someone to save you," she said, her eyes shining. "You just need someone to remind you you're worth saving." Ethan's expression softened, the words sinking deep. He reached for her hand, not as rescue, not as possession, but as quiet acknowledgement, 2 souls who had weathered the same storm and chosen to grow from it. Grace looked once more at her old cubicle, now glowing in the morning sun. Once, it had been a cage. Now, it was a monument proof of where she had been and how far she'd come. She smiled one last time, then turned toward the elevator. The doors opened smoothly this time. No locks, no fear, just choice. As they stepped inside together, the light followed them in, golden and bright. The doors closed softly. Outside, the rain stopped completely, and for the first time in years, the city felt still, washed clean, waiting for its next story to begin. Sometimes life doesn't open the door. We expect it closes one instead. And in that moment, it's easy to mistake protection for punishment or delay for defeat. But as Grace Bennett learned, not every locked door means you're trapped. Some are there to keep you from running away before you discover your own worth. Her story reminds us that courage isn't always loud or heroic. Sometimes it's quiet, choosing to stay, to speak, to rebuild when walking away would be easier. It's about realizing that our value doesn't come from titles, approval, or the voices around us, but from the strength we find when we stop hiding from who we are. We all have our rainy nights, the moments we feel unseen, unheard, or tired of trying. But those storms often become the turning points that reveal what we're truly made of. So the next time you find yourself standing before a closed door, don't rush to escape. Breathe. Wait. Listen. Maybe it's not the end of your story. Maybe it's the moment your story finally begins. Thank you for spending your time with Shining Stories. If Grace's journey touched something in you, a memory, a feeling, a quiet part of yourself that once felt unseen, know that you are not alone. Every story we share is a reminder that it's never too late to begin again, to choose courage, and to see your own worth. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that heal hearts and light the way through the rain.